Hi there. Welcome to the Craig Preservation Lab at Indiana University Bloomington. My name is Natalie Guingrich, and I am the paper lab technician here. I was inspired to become a preservationist after spending a summer working with the Maryland State Archives Conservation Department. Working in the Conservation Department was completely different from anything I had done before. Previously, I had worked in the Special Collections Department for my school, but the Conservation Department brought me in contact with materials that I never would have sought out on my own. One of my favorite parts of my current position is the broad range of materials that come across my desk. While I am the paper lab technician, in reality, I work on most of the archival and special collections that need preservation at my libraries. I've had the opportunity to work with all sorts of different collections, including the personal correspondence of a Nobel Prize winner, obscure dictionary ephemera, signs from student protests on campus, and even hand-drawn figurines that were used to block scenes for the movie Hoosiers. Often, there are standard treatments on materials that teach me about a topic that I never would have sought out on my own. Other times, there are collections that present unique challenges that let me utilize my problem-solving skills. To me, it's the perfect balance of repetitive work with my hands and work that lets me be creative and innovative. One of the standard projects that I learned a lot from is the scrapbooks of Doc Councilman. Doc Councilman was an Indiana University faculty member and coach of the swim team from 1957 to 1990. Councilman went on to coach the U.S. Olympics men's swimming team in 1964 and 1976. He was also briefly the oldest man to swim the English Channel in 1979. One scrapbook was on brittle and acidic paper, and the other one had a page style that included adhesive strips and plastic page covers that were likely to degrade over time. We opted to digitize the layout of each page of the scrapbooks and then remove the contents of the pages to store them in folders to prevent further damage. Through working on the project, I learned a whole section of Indiana sports history that I never would have learned if not for this project. A different project that required my full set of problem-solving skills was the Carl Eigenmann relics. When this section of the Eigenmann papers were brought to our attention, I knew that it would be an interesting project to work on. Now, relics is a fairly vague term, but these relics turned out to be a few boxes plus an envelope of lichen, rock, shell, and pine cone samples that were collected from the United States West Coast around 1885 by Carl Eigenmann, who was an IU alumnus, professor, and administrator from the 1880s through 1920. The first point of order in preserving this collection was to make sure that all of the lichen samples were matched up to their corresponding label cards. It required a fair bit of Googling the scientific names of different types of lichen listed on the cards to match everything up. I was able to clean the labels of residual dirt and dust, and then use small strips of Japanese paper to essentially create a seat belt to attach each piece to its original label. The collection came from University Archives and was going to be used in the instruction of a class later in the year. One of the requests they made was that it would be easy to display the collection without requiring a lot of handling of the samples, especially as organic matter continues to degrade despite being in the archives. It required a bit of creativity, but I came up with a series of trays that stack into a larger box. Each tray has an equivalent of photo corners to hold in individual labels to prevent them from shuffling around while in the box. These are just two of the many interesting projects that I get to work on as a preservationist, and I find new favorites all of the time. Happy Preservation Week 2025. What do you want to preserve?